From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Bring him back. Let him answer the question. Bring him back. All the best to you, Warren, Shari and everyone else. Welcome to the show. Now, before we do anything else, happy birthday, Mum. My beautiful mother, Jude, is having her 21st birthday. All the best to you, to Wayne. We love you oh so much. You're a wonderful grandmother and mother as well. So happy birthday, Mum. Hope you enjoy the flowers. Now, obviously, speaking of, we've got Mother's Day coming up on Sunday. An opportunity for all of us to tell the people in our life, yes, women, that we love them, that we appreciate everything that they do. Certainly in our house, my beautiful wife holds the whole show together while I'm doing whatever the heck it is that I do each and every day, apart from be here on the telly. And it's a beautiful opportunity. There's also these lovely little traditions that we have, particularly if you've got little kids, and you know mine are in primary school, so I'm across all this stuff. Remember those little Mother's Day stalls where the kids go and spend $2 here and $5 there if they're able to, and Dad just quickly went, oh, sugar, that's on Sunday, is it? All right, here's $20, do something, right? Lovely, cute little moment, right? I love it, it's always beautiful. Then there's the art that, of course, your kids make if they're in preschool, or they just decide they're going to draw a picture of Mum or see what happens, and often it's frame-worthy, isn't it? But you may have heard this one, but today we learned that there is a private school in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales that just decided Mother's Day was going to be a problem for some people, or someone somewhere's going to be worried because we call it Mother's Day. So they have rebranded it a family small gift stall. A family gift store. And it's happening tomorrow. The email, which has been around the past couple of days, says the purpose of this stall is to celebrate the loved ones. Students have a special job of choosing a gift for their loved one in mind. Look, here's the deal. They're buying a present for their mum, the lady who is their mum. If they're buying it for their foster mum, that's their mum. If they're buying it for their grandparents because they're the ones who have taken over, well, that's their mum too. I'm not entirely sure what is the combination of identities that are offended by what we call a Mother's Day stall. And is the kid going to care because their parent doesn't identify as... Like, seriously? Now, apparently this came not as a decision of the school, but after feedback from some of the parents. Now, of course, you remember this. I know this. Often one of the most frustrating things about being a parent is other parents. But the idea that the school just didn't turn around and go, no, sorry, it's called Mother's Day. See you later, move on. Anyway, all the best to all the wonderful women that watch us each and every night, the ones that are in our lives, the ones that shape our lives, and most importantly, to those of you who have lost a mum recently, or lost her a long time ago, I know this day hurts. So strength and love, as always, to you. And I'm thinking of you and your mum who's not here anymore as well. Now, obviously, on this show, it won't surprise you, we love Australia. But doesn't everyone? Even the people who claim to dislike it. Still, we can all have a bit of pride in our country, right? But we all know that this is not acceptable. Certainly not on Australia Day. So, OK, we still show our pride in our country when, say, the Matildas are in the World Cup. We can get behind a sporting team. And we can certainly celebrate the idea that we live in a country where we can scream at each other about politics, but we have elections in peace. Nobody protests at the polls, let alone blows up about what the reactions to the polls are. So I must say something sparked my interest today, which was the Australian Population Research Institute. Now, I don't know if this is the Pons Institute or if this is a serious academic organisation, but regardless, they put a survey out today, and we all know the media loves a survey. So they were able to ask a couple of thousand people about the pride that you have in the country, the sense of belonging. Now, I don't think this is particularly complicated about what the sense of belonging is, but the people who have a great extent, it's not in the 70s, it's not in the 80s, it's not in the 90s. It's less than 50% in Melbourne. It's about 60% in Brisbane, and it's somewhere in between in Sydney. Now, amazingly, those people who say they have only slight or maybe no sense of belonging in Australia at all 10% in Sydney, 13% in Melbourne, and 11% in Brisbane. Now, I've been trying to interpret what does this possibly mean? If you're on that side of things, what does it mean? Does it mean that you're new to the country and you think that the traditions or the people who speak or our politics, I don't know, right? And okay, I'm doing the benefit of the doubt here, but the sense of belonging, I mean, this is a very open society where it doesn't matter where you came from. If you have a heart attack, the fellow Australian will pay for it. We've got an excellent welfare system, a social welfare system. We've got a huge amount of charity that takes place. When things like homelessness happen, which is unforgivable about the numbers that it is at the moment, there are people who literally volunteer their time all day, every day to deal with it. You know, I certainly know that the respect that I have for people who work in the community sector is huge, right? And that's all about building a sense of belonging. But maybe I can start to work out why this question is answered in the fashion that it does. Because when you have a look at younger people and how they feel about their sense of belonging in the country, guess what? It plummets. The number of people between the ages of 18 to 29 who believe that they have a sense of belonging to a great extent is just 26%. A quarter of young people in Melbourne feel that they have a sense of belonging. 33 in Brisbane and in Sydney. For those who feel slightly or not at all, how is this okay? We're now at a scenario where, there's 1 in 5 in Melbourne, 1 in 5 in Brisbane, 15% in Sydney. Now, again, loneliness, if that is what this is a reflection of, well, you'd expect those numbers to be particularly high the older that you get. Because the reality is one of the biggest groups of people in our country are people who live by themselves in older age, particularly at the moment, women, because of life expectancy, all the rest of it, let alone relationships. But there's a lot of lonely people in the country. But you would expect those to be the people that have lived a life, who've had a whole series of things happen to them that means they end up in a place. And as always, I always say strength and love, and we're always thinking of you. And I hope that over the years we've been together, you know you've got a mate here each and every night. And while we're not able to have the full chat back and forth, you know that I'm thinking about you when we put the show together and the issues that we talk about, all types of Australians who are forgotten. But is the reason why so many young people don't feel a sense of belonging in the country because of the crap that they have been force-fed by the cool kids, by the media, by the left, by the education system? Well, think about it. You don't have a national day anymore because that's all about an invasion. You'll never be able to buy a house because all of the boomers were able to rig the system. Not true, by the way. And of course, if that doesn't get you, climate change will, where people literally glue themselves to the streets because they think that the world is going to end. And even if Australia, which produces 1% of the world's problem, did 100% of what they want, guess what? It would still be a problem because China is able to continue to pollute and do whatever it wants until 2030. Now, these little studies and surveys, and again, I'm not pretending that this is the census, but still, if it turns around and shows us that 15% of 18 to 29-year-olds feel slightly or not at all a sense of belonging in the country, or 22% in Melbourne, or 22% in Brisbane, then another wake-up call about not just that the kids aren't all right, but why do people keep spinning the stories of how terrible this joint is when, for obvious reasons, and you blink at the rest of the world, you would know. You want to be here all day, every day. Now, my dear friend Chris Kenny, of course, primetime starts at 5 o'clock with him each and every night right here on Sky News. Make sure that you watch his show, Peter's show, Andrew's show, Sharry's show, my show, The Late Debate and Rita's show. See, I support all my colleagues because they're all my mates too. Well, he today, before he had a conversation with Greg Hunt, the former health minister, showed the most exceptional collection of madness that this country was put through for a couple of years by politicians who were just getting off on their power and their ability to tell people what not to do because they might catch the Wu flu.
People living in New South Wales, they have New South Wales hospitals. In Queensland, we have Queensland hospitals for our people.
Playgrounds, basketball courts, skate parks and exercise equipment, despite the fact that it's outdoors, will be closed.
People can walk the dog around the street. Don't talk to your neighbours.
Browsing is not allowed.
So please, when you open your front door, just think for a moment, do you really need to go out?
Obviously, school holidays are upon us, so we've based upon the advice of the Chief Health Officer, allowed for people to go on holidays, but subject to quite stringent rules.
If you are at Adelaide Oval and the ball comes towards you, my advice to you is to duck and just do not touch that ball.
There's a whole bunch of people down the Ryback Beach last night who thought the best thing to do was to go and watch the sunset. I'm sure it was a beautiful sunset, but that's not in the spirit or in the letter of these rules.
Seriously. We remember talking about it, we remember fighting it, we remember rolling our eyes, but you remember the feeling where all of, more please! This was leadership. I must say that while we all know that the absolute champion of the stupid was the stupid ideas was the lady with the football at the Adelaide Oval, but no browsing! Right up there. Let alone the petulance about Queensland hospitals and the idiocy of Daniel Andrews. But of course, everyone that you saw in all of that has now moved on to lifetime pensions and big corporate jobs. The health officers have all been given Orders of Australia, or they were named Citizen of the Year. But the reality was that as we were sitting here for those couple of years, and again, I'm always so moved by people, particularly in Victoria, who say, thank goodness for you guys, you got us through those tough couple of years, because it felt like we were the only sane ones, right? Well, we understood that there might have been a problem at the start, but then we were starting to get a little over the top. Anyway, Greg Hunt, of course, was the health minister at the federal level. He was there with the chief health officer, and national cabinets and all the rest of it. Well, he has written many hundreds of pages to Anthony Albanese's half-assed inquiry into COVID. And I'm glad that he's done so, because it's important that that half-assed inquiry, and I say it twice because it is, this disgraceful inquiry that's all behind closed doors, that won't be having sort of public hearings, will not be investigating the roles of the state, will not be letting the people who saw their loved ones die behind glass or they weren't allowed in at all, that all of those people, of course, have a right to be heard, yet this government is, of course, desperate in trying to save the backside of the Labor state governments, and it's all about trying to blame the previous federal government. So they set up this silly inquiry where two of the three people already agree with the government. One of them's a former Labor staffer, and she deleted an awful lot of tweets, believe me, an awful lot of tweets, because governments only launch inquiries knowing what the end is going to be. But at least more confirmation that the federal government, who's copped it a lot, particularly from the right, about their behaviour during the pandemic. It's good to hear the health minister turn around and say what all of us knew at the time, but it was so much noise and often contradicted by your local state politician trying to screw over the federal government. What exactly was the federal government's position during all of that COVID nonsense? Well, the health minister has come forward. He's put forward a submission to this silly inquiry. But he spoke to our mate Chris Kenny a bit earlier today, and he says, among other things, school closures should always be off the table.
Our view was that schools were overwhelmingly a safe and desirable place. This is not new now. This is what we said in real time at that time.
And Victoria, among others, was making a whole lot of decisions that weren't actually based at all off health advice. Remember, at the time, and again, in the noise, it's hard to remember everything, but things like the curfew with the police flying around because you might be walking outside your house at 9 o'clock at night. Oh, goodness me. Despite the fact, of course, there was duck egg transmissions that were actually happening outside. That was the evidence from New South Wales. These decisions were just being made because they could, not because there was actual medical advice around them.
I was not aware of medical advice for curfews in Victoria or for the 5 kilometre rule, and I believe there was some discussion at the time that there was not a medical basis. And if you had to have medical advice, then those elements would arguably never have occurred, and I think that would have been a good outcome.
The school thing, I will never forgive the state politicians who shut it down for as long as they did. Maybe for the first couple of weeks, maybe for the first month, but the fact it went on and on and on and on, and even those idiots in Queensland, the government in Queensland, who of course made the decision to delay the return of, I think, even the 2023 school year. It's ridiculous. We know it. But the point is, unless there's a proper Royal Commission where this stuff can be said in public, and the findings of the Royal Commission make it absolutely clear that no matter the circumstances, no Australian should have to die alone. And no kid should be told they're not going to school. And outside is not the danger. But of course, they're not interested in that at all, because there are secretly the same people who gave advice to the same politicians, or the next generation of politicians, who all want their moment, where everyone's leaning forward at 11 a.m. each and every morning to be told, what can you do and what can't you do? It was an awful period in Australian history. It is unforgivable, the abuses that took place during it. And the idea that even the sensible things that are being said by Greg Hunt will just sort of go into the ether tells us everything about how unserious this government is about actually learning any of its lessons. Now, yesterday in Western Australia, the Prime Minister was there for 24 hours, pop up, the fly-in, fly-out Prime Minister, because, you know, show that he cares. But of course, one of the many reasons why people in Western Australia have got a problem with this bloke at the moment is because his government failed to keep people safe. There is a person who is alleged of bashing a woman in her 70s within an inch of her life. This person, in my view, should always have been denied bail, but federal officials didn't apply for it. He was supposed to have ankle monitors, but they came off because the group that the federal government set up, that they're in charge of course, decided that he shouldn't have it. And something that I, again, repeat from last night's program was that the Prime Minister should be the person who ultimately owns not just the faults of his government, but also shows basic humanity. Shows basic humanity to the good citizens who did nothing wrong. And when you're in an opportunity to be in the same city as somebody who was so egregiously done over because of the faults of your system that you should meet with them face to face. Oh, but Albo can't ever admit a mistake, can he?
I'm not currently scheduled to visit Nanette Simons.
Now, I must say, while we were having this conversation last night, I thought, while you and I share the outrage about it, does the general public share the outrage about it? Yes, they do. But is the media that are often so complicit in the cover-up of the lies each and every day from this Prime Minister, are they going to call him out? Well, well done to whoever made the decision on the front page of the West Australian, the newspaper in Perth, because they highlighted the disgrace that was a Prime Minister who flew in and flew out and would not meet with a victim who did not have to be a victim, but was a victim nonetheless. Good on them for highlighting it, and I do hope the people of Western Australia remember the character of the Prime Minister who will be sucking up to you in the lead up to the election, but when he doesn't need your vote, he doesn't even care to turn up upon the failures of his own government. But as we know, the High Court due to make a big decision tomorrow, again, about whether or not an Iranian who is not a refugee will be able to stay in the country, because he says if he goes back there he's going to be persecuted for his sexuality. But as we all know, the High Court last year made the decision that a sex offender had to be released from permanent detention, and thus all 150 people had to go out from permanent detention. As we've told you, they were released with the wrong visas, some with no visas, there was no security, the ankle bracelets were on and they were off. Yet the government told us all the time, they're trying to keep you safe.
What we are working through at the moment is a scheme that will help us keep the community safe within the legal limits of the Commonwealth, and that is the bill that has been agreed to by the Parliament this week.
But of course, as we know, these people who have now promised, oh, we put a system in place to keep people safe, it's the system that let down the lady in Western Australia. It's the system that did not argue for bail when it had every opportunity to, and it is the system that has not used the paperwork to even bring a charge against any of the 150 people, should they do things like break curfew. Now, remember, when all of this legislation was happening, The opposition were the ones who came out and said, this is disgraceful, come up with something, come up with it now. But then Claire O'Neill was all puffy-chested, and she, along with the idiot Andrew Giles, was running around pretending, oh, we've passed this, we've got this incredible legislation, the legislation they don't use, by the way, and you must back this. And then there was some confusion about exactly when did they start planning for this. Because remember, in May of last year is when this thing was before the High Court. There was one of two things that were going to happen. Government would be able to hold on to the existing position, or they would lose. What would be their plan the moment they lost? Well, it became very obvious that there was no plan whatsoever. Why? Because we saw what happened. People who were just dumped in hotels, no security, the ankle bracelets that came on and off, and they were released with no visas, or maybe the wrong visa. And there was a whopper that we called out at the time that all of this was apparently, all this chaos was apparently what the government had planned for. They had options ready if the case wasn't won.
We had properly prepared for the decision. And that is why a week and 1 day after the decision, after a major High Court decision, we had put in place all of the things I've referred to there.
Well, guess what? She's lying. Why? Because, as the Sydney Morning Herald reported today, the very laws that she says were in the planning and that's why we got it all passed were not drawn up until after the High Court decision. Departmental documents released under Freedom of Information law show legislation for curfews and ankle monitors was being developed at a rapid pace from the 10th of November. Now, on the 8th of November is when the High Court made its decision. On the 9th is when the opposition said that the government had to act immediately, and they started drawing up the legislation the day later. A Home Affairs spokesperson says the department had provided the government with advance options for legislation for all possible outcomes, both prior to the hearing and the orders made on the 8th. But they didn't draw up the legislation until after the decision was made. So as opposed to having the option for the laws written up, ready to go, ready to pass the second the Parliament was able to meet after the High Court's decision, oh no, they waited till they got called out by the opposition, and then they started running around, and then they started pretending to put a system in place. And I think it's because they thought that the reality of 150 people with serious criminal records in some cases being released into the community was going to be no different than the ISIS brides. Remember the ISIS brides? The ones who were brought back into the country despite the fact that they knowingly left the country to join a caliphate where if you did not believe in their bastardised version of Islam, you will die. And in the most violent and horrific circumstances. Everyone remembers what ISIS did to people. Well, but because there were kids involved, they ended up getting brought back into the country, and thankfully, to this moment, there's been no indication about poor behaviour from the ISIS brides, but the assumption was, just like they ignored the communities who said we don't want this, they ignored those of us who said that there was potential dangers in all of this. They thought exactly the same thing was going to happen with the 150. It was only when they got called out, when they had realised that there may well end up being a problem, that they actually started drawing up the legislation. They lied. Every day this week I've been able to point out a lie. Make sure you spread this video around before they ban this conversation as misinformation. For his part, James Patterson, the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, the person who would, along with Peter Dutton, actually run the system properly, says the government's chaotic response to the High Court's ruling is because they did not do their homework. 100%. It's no wonder why they've been so hapless in every step, and they had to be led by the coalition to do the right thing. My oath. Tuesday night, special coverage on Paul Murray Live, special 90-minute edition of Paul Murray Live, starting at 9:30 in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Canberra. We'll be going all the way through and having an all-star lineup. Andrew Bolt will be here, Chris Kenny will be here, lots of politicians to go through the budget, and I've seen plenty of these things, so I'm able to call the BS straight away. So 9:30 Tuesday night, join us for the unique, true take on the budget. But all the pre-sale is going on right now and all these pesky lies are getting in the way. But of course, the Prime Minister is trying to pretend that he didn't lie at the last election when he said that cost of living would go down under a Labor government. 2 years in, we now have the best part of 80% of Australians who currently are experiencing, according to finder.com.au, extreme cost of living pressures. So out and about, Albo and Chalmers were trying to pretend that they are going to fix everyone's problems on Tuesday. Now, in part what they are saying here is why Australians are about to be flush with more cash is because wages are now starting to go up ever so slightly higher than inflation. Not for everyone. It helps if you work in the public service. But I'll read some of the spin that they have been putting into the market today. Treasury has forecast Australians' real disposable income will grow by 3.5% in 24-25 due to increased wages, lower inflation and more take-home pay via the Stage 3 tax cuts. Now, this is one of those little details inside the budget that Treasury just gets to make up and nobody double-checks whether they got it right the last year. Well, I'll give you the tip, just like the tax take, just like the deficit, just like the iron ore price, just like the unemployment rate, they just guess, but always they get it wrong. They always underquote, so governments can turn around and say, oh, we did so much better than what the expectation was in the budget. But that's just all Canberra smoke and mirrors, right? Another version of the spin the government was putting around here today was, as a result of these decisions, the average Australian household will be almost $1,900 better off a year under the Stage 3 tax cuts, because remember, they're still selling these things. Now, despite the fact, remember, that was another lie. Oh, we've only just made the decision, but they were putting the paperwork together almost, 18 months earlier? Apparently, $1,900 a week, everyone's going to be better off as a result of the too little, too late tax cuts. Well, guess what happens when you take $1,900 and divide it by the 52 weeks of the year? The average taxpayer will only be $36.31 better off. So they're telling everyone it's all good, cost of living is going to be fixed, and even if their pay rise judgments are correct and they're able to push around the numbers on tax cuts, $36 a week better off. But you watch everyone turn around and say, oh, the annual number, the annual number. Well, of course, you don't get an automatic tax return of, say, $1,500, which is what had happened for the past couple of years. And you got that $1,500 at once, automatically, when you put in a tax return. No. Best case scenario, $1,900 a year, but that's not given back to you in one lump sum. Instead, it's just taken off the bill you pay in tax each week, each fortnight, each month. So guess what? They're not actually fixing cost of living. No matter what they say, what lies they tell, what spin they put around, or what members of the media will pump up the figure. When you see these annual numbers, divide by 52, and then you will see to any household in Australia, cost of living is not fixed with $39 a week, let alone the $15 a week if you're earning $45,000 right now. Now, the truth about Australia, as difficult as it is to say, is that we live in a little bit of a fantasy land when we think that the people who actually run the country are the people that we elect, that we get the opportunity to vote for every 3 years or 4 years if the Prime Minister is able to get another referendum up. That won't be happening to extend parliamentary terms. And the most that any politician can earn is about $500,000, and that's going to be the Prime Minister. But from the backbench at $200,000 all the way up, it's a pretty good living. Now, of course, these people are put in charge to have not just ultimate responsibility, but ultimate say and ultimate power to be in charge of the things that are on their business card. The Department of Home Affairs, or the Treasury, or the Agriculture Department, or the Arts Department. But we know that the reality is that the ministers are just bit players. The real people who are in charge are the very well-paid bosses of these public servants. The public servants who see ministers come and go a dozen or more times over a career, and they know if they don't like the policy, particularly if it's a Liberal government, they just slow play the ball. They say it's too hard. They say it's too expensive. A little bit like that person at the office every time you say, hey, can I just get an upgrade to my computer? Oh, that'll cost $30,000, and therefore it never happens, right? Well, what about what some of these people are paid? Because here's a wonderful example of other people's money and these people who, by the way, got the biggest pay rise along with the rest of the public service in 10 years. This is what they get paid. Prime Minister, $500,000. Person in charge of his department, $977,000. Prime Minister, can be sacked by the people. Person in charge of these departments, well, you've got to stay as long as the contract says. Jim Chalmers doesn't earn $500,000, but the person who runs the department that says computer says no. $952,770. The person who runs the Agriculture Department, $928,000. The person who runs the Attorney General's Department, $928,000. $928,000 for the boss of the Climate Change Department, which, by the way, is more than we pay the person who runs the Defence Department at $928,000 as well. Ridiculous. Sorry, same number. Plus, the Education Department gets paid the same as the Defence Department, as does the Department of Employment, as does the Department of Finance, as does the Department of Foreign Affairs, as does the Department of Home Affairs, as does the Department of Social Services. So we vote for the people that we think are in charge, who get paid less, way less in times, than half of the people who give them the advice, who represent all the bureaucrats who just turn around and say, sorry, too hard. Now, I've spoken before about the disgrace that is playing out in Queensland right now as they are trying to basically bribe voters to vote for the terrible Labor government that deserves to get flushed, to go. They should have gone 4 years ago, but they definitely should go at this upcoming election. Now, supposedly, it's a $1,000 power bill rebate. But the Courier Mail's been very clever, and they've worked out that, guess what, if you actually are able to fill out the paperwork, move to this, move to that, you can just play money kaplunk. And the $1,000 could just end up dropping into your bank account, i.e. it's a straight-up bribe for you to vote for a terrible government. Now, my assumption is Queenslanders will just take the money but still boot out the government. But the Treasurer, when confronted on this, kind of confirms, OK, whatever, as long as you vote for us, I don't care what you do with the money.
I think Queenslanders know this money comes off their power bill and then they can use that however they wish. Leave it on their account as a credit or use it in a different way instead of paying their power bill.
It's basically just please vote for us. $1,000. $1,000. Now, of course, this will, if you do end up with the $1,000, it'll be inflationary, but who cares? We're just getting to the next election. We don't care what happens to the feds. But if it is inflationary, then, of course, guess what? The Reserve Bank goes, line ball call, rates go up. Seriously. These people. As for the readers of the Courier Mail, I appreciate many of the comments that ended up turning up in their sites today. Of course they stuffed it up. They couldn't run a bath. Every village has an idiot. Miles stands unopposed. One thing is certain, everyone can only spend it once, which makes the spending completely immaterial. Correct. And in a couple of hours' time, Stormy Daniels is back in the court in New York, and the media will be oh so excited because the former porn star will be giving even more lurid details about her one night of love with the former president. Love that he, of course, denies, but still. Of course, it doesn't matter what actually happened on the night and who said what and what music was playing and where did he show us on the dolly, all the rest of it, right? Because it's not about what happened in the room that night, it's all about the accounting of it. Now, I obviously don't think these things are crimes. They've all been trumped-up charges, literally, by the New York government in order to get a conviction, in order to do what they can in the lead-up to the next election. But the media, who, of course, could choose not to tell you some of the stuff, still tell us too much, but then they turn around and go, oh, how offensive.
It was a lot. I mean, it was talk about a condom. It was talk about the sexual position. Let me stop. Yeah.
Oh, missionary? How could they? Seriously? There are those who, of course, have just been cheering Trump on and saying, what more detail the better, baby.
It could be that you really blacked out after having sex with Trump, which is a compliment. Truly, he screwed the brains out of her.
Oh, God.
That makes him a sex god.
But then there's the reality of her testimony, which even on Morning Joe, which is this great sort of circle conversation that they have on Lefty TV each and every morning in America, where her evidence is actually not
Stormy Daniels is one of those witnesses that tends to not just answer the question asked, but add her own editorial. And that is a really dangerous thing. I promise you the prosecution is sitting at their desk saying, just answer the question. Please just answer the question. Please.
At about 11 o'clock Eastern time in Australia is when you'll certainly see Trump moving. By about 11:30 is when things start, and then all night long, if you want to sit up and learn about it for yourself, you can watch the details play out all night long. Quick break. Back with more. We're going to have quite a fun little debate for the rest of the show, including what do you think is the winner and loser of the week. We're also going to have a chat, of course, about the protests that are taking place, and also worth mentioning too here, does Labor make inflation worse? Keen to know what you think. You can always send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. Looking forward to this chat. Let's finish off our week with three of our favourites here, none other than the wonderful Michael Kroger, joining us now from Melbourne. Linda Scott, of course, here, and just in case it rains. But no, she's actually been travelling. She's been travelling, and she's here, and we appreciate that she's here very much so. And, of course, Liberal MP Henry Pike as well. Lovely to see you. So let's deal with the big, complicated stuff first, but let's not spend all night talking about it. And it is, however, the stuff that's been happening in and around our universities at the moment, particularly UQ, where the university protests started to get out of hand. But then there is something that we'll all be learning about by this time tomorrow, which is Australia going to vote to recognise Palestine in the United Nations? Now, obviously, Palestine is a place that has been represented at the United Nations for some time, but it doesn't have voting rights. It's technically not a country in the United Nations. However, if the broader countries get together to decide that should be the case, well, then they get a vote. Now, of course, it's not the Security Council and everything gets overridden by everyone else, but still a big chat in the next couple of days. So, Michael, let's start with the protests first before we get into what the government may or may not be doing tomorrow. We see the university vice-chancellors trying to sort of hide behind the Attorney-General is the one who should decide what can and can't be said. We see property starting to be damaged in Queensland. And I noticed that when they put their signs up, among other things saying F classes, they're written on the back of Greens corflutes from the Brisbane Council election.
What a surprise, mate, that the Greens are involved in this. Look, left-wing demonstrations are designed not only to publicise their cause, but more importantly to intimidate people. And that's what they're trying to do here. So the more angry the demonstrations, the more damage they create, the more extreme the language, it gets public attention, it intimidates people. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So these hard left, ratbags that come to universities and, pro-Palestinian, that yell things at students and abuse Jewish students, they're designed to intimidate people. And the fact that in Australia in 2024 we hear virtually nothing from the university vice-chancellors, nothing from the university councils, and I'm sorry to say nothing from Julie Bishop, who's the Chancellor of the ANU, and David Gonski, who's the Chancellor of UNSW. Julie and David, where are you? Where are you? They're not particularly your campuses, but the nation needs you two people to speak out against this Jew hatred, the vile elements of neo-Nazism that are involved in a lot of these demonstrations. You ought to be condemning, as the Minister should be, condemning ANU students who support Hamas, Queensland students that fly the flags of Palestinian terrorist organisations, students and young children yelling out for the destruction of Israel and the death of Jews. I mean, boy, I've never seen Australia worse. All this is happening under Albo's watch. He hasn't been strong enough. Some of his ministers we know have disgraced themselves, like Jason Clare, and I think it's getting worse. But Albanese, the state governments and the university chancellors and vice-chancellors, they need to step up because their performance has been absolutely lamentable.
So, Linda, if the game is free speech, then why don't the protesters, when somebody does go too far, does express hatred of Jews, not boot those people out of the protests and say it's all about the citizens, it's all about Rafah, it's all about the kids? Why don't the protesters boot out the elements that clearly no one's going to support?
Well, look, Paul, I don't speak for the protesters, as you can imagine, and I'm so disappointed to hear Michael Kroger just taking a really one-sided and really partisan approach to this. Let's just paint a picture in my beautiful hometown of Sydney at the moment. We've had a horrific terrorist attack declared. We've had a horrific attack occurring in Bondi Junction. We've got significant knife crimes and domestic violence in my city of Sydney, in Alexandria this week, and we've got a huge number of protests each and every weekend. This is really a very difficult time, in large part due to what are global conflicts and, in other cases, local protests and problems. But what we don't need is partisan attacks, and what we don't need is the politicisation of what is objectively a very difficult time, not just here in Australia, but globally. What we need is sensible, principles-based approaches to these kinds of things. I want to actually compliment the universities. I think they're in a very, very difficult position, and I think they're trying to balance what is a very, very hard scenario about the freedom of speech versus when protests clearly become dangerous. I've got a motion before my council.
Shame on you, Linda. Shame on you.
Monday to try and remove hate speech in an hour. I want to follow the lead of the City of Melbourne, who has moved to try and get any hate speech graffiti down within an hour. I think that's a good initiative. I've moved for that at the City of Sydney. But what we don't need right now are partisan attacks. What we don't need is the promotion of more division.
Okay. Henry, I want to get you
what
in.
What we don't need, Linda, is... what we don't need is... We don't need racism, we don't need anti-Semitism, we don't need the hatred of Jews, we don't need the promotion of terrorist organisations, Linda. What we don't need is pathetic, weak polybabble, I'm sorry to say, like you've just gone on with. You know, that is just an invitation to weakness, you know, and if that's the best you can do, that was insipid and pathetic. What we do need is leadership. Right? We need leadership. We need people to stand up against Jewish hatred in this country and not merely mouth words like, oh, we can't be partisan. Yes, we need to be partisan. We need to be partisan on the side of democracies and freedom and liberty, and we need to oppose terrorism. We need to oppose those people that want to destroy Western values, Linda. That's what we need.
Henry, you've been very patient. What should Australia do in the UN tomorrow?
I think it would send completely the wrong message, Paul, for Australia to support this motion to try to bring Palestine in as a new UN nation. I think what message would that send to Hamas as to their actions on October 7? It would say that what you did has achieved a terrific outcome for the Palestinian people. And I think that would be a really foolish message for the world to send. And I hope that the Australian representatives there will take the correct stand on that front. But it's certainly going to be concerning to watch what happens over the next 24 hours. And I'm concerned about what the responses will be on our university campuses, and particularly for those Jewish students who are trying to just go about their daily business, trying to learn. And I think university chancellors certainly need to be stepping up to the plate and taking leadership to try to calm down the temperatures on campuses.
Well, here's the test, right? What happens to students who did this? This is the footage that we've shown earlier in the night here on Sky News. What happens to the people who do this to presumably another student? Roll the tape.
And that's what we're doing right now. This man needs to leave immediately. And you people, every time you dare to show your face, you Israeli-loving genocide supporters, we will be here. We will not leave.
Truly madness. Look, free speech, protests, all the rest of it about humanitarian stuff. That stuff is obvious intimidation. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Who's the winner and loser of the week? I think Albo I can already put down as a lying loser. Winners and losers of the week in a moment or two's time. Late debate after that. Don't forget we're here on Sunday night as we celebrate Mother's Day, all right? Not birthing parent day or any whatever that garbage. We're here, of course, with Henry Pike, with Linda Scott and with Michael Kroger. So from solving the Middle East to now, just how fast should you be allowed to drive down a street? Yarra Council has decided to say that it should be 30 k's an hour. Fitzroy and Collingwood. Michael, are you ready to be slowed down to 30 k's an hour as you roll through the streets of Wokeville?
Well, this is Green Central. So eventually what they'd like to do is to get cars off the roads altogether in the Yarra Council area. That's basically their objective. You know, they don't say that, but 30k is a pretty low number. And the police today dismissed it on radio. The head of the police here in Victoria dismissed it as having any relevance to saving lives or helping the road toll at all. So just another wacky idea from, you know, Green Central down here in Melbourne.
Yeah. Now, Henry, if they did this in your area, what would happen?
There would be open insurrection on the streets, Paul. That's but the people of inner city Melbourne, they are a different breed. I think this is a welcome move. Slow them down, wrap them in bubble wrap, maybe weld their doors shut. Whatever they want from the nanny state, give it to let them have it.
Now, Mother's Day, Sunday, Linda, you're going to be taking part of a thing called the Mother's Day Classic, and I want to promote this because it's a chance to be able to donate to Linda's efforts. Mother's Day Classic raises money for what?
Prevention of and research against breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Just a terrible killer and impacts so many Australian, in particular women, but of course also for breast cancer men. We can do so much more. And so, yeah, I'm going for a brisk 5k walk, possibly in the Sydney rain on Sunday morning, to do everything I can to raise a couple more dollars for the Mother's Day Classic and for the prevention of breast and ovarian cancer.
All right, if you want to do it, obviously follow Linda on all of her socials. We'll put it up on ours as well. Just go searching for Paul Murray Live on Facebook. All right, winners and losers of the week. Henry, who stands out for you? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
The big thumbs down for me this week has been Andrew Giles. He's been hiding under his doona since this alleged assault that took place in Perth. He won't be able to hide next week when he comes before the Parliament. And, yeah, definitely my big loser for the week this week.
Yeah, my oath. Michael, yours?
Well, on that topic, read Neil Brown's hilarious article on Andrew Giles in next Monday's Spectator magazine on that topic. Winner of the week, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Reps in America, who survived a vote to get rid of him. Loser of the week, Joe Biden, who's had another shocker after last week saying that he's asked the Israelis not to go into Haifa. He'd asked them not to go to Haifa. We meant Rafah. Haifa, the northern city in Israel, where the Israelis already are. Secondly, his confusion over whether to support the Israelis. One day he's supporting them, the next minute he's not with weapons. It's time for the man to retire. And, mate, as I said the other week, it's time for you to start filling that suitcase, I think.
Yeah, I think November's looking all right. Linda, winner or loser this week?
Look, loser of the week is Donald Trump. You know, this Stormy Daniels case is just getting more unbelievable by the day. This man just should not be the leader of the US, and that's becoming even more clear by the day.
Got no
winner
time
of the
to
week,
debate this.
I want to say, is backbencher and my very good friend, the member for Bennelong, Jerome Laxale. If you go to his Facebook page this week, he's posted a photo of an article about one of his constituents speaking about dreams she's having about how hot Jim Chalmers is.
Oh, stop
and the lead up to the federal budget next week, I want to say to you that the comment section is very entertaining.
Can that get shut down with misinformation?
From the women of Bennelong. So good on you, Jerome Laxale, for featuring that very entertaining discussion. I can't wait for the budget
The rules
next
of
week.
this winners losers where I can't butt in are being abused. And can you send me the link, because I'm going to do a whole 25 minutes on that on Sunday. All right, thank you very much. Do appreciate it, guys. Have a wonderful weekend. All the best to your mums, be they
Thanks,
here or
mate.
not. Thank you, guys. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you very much for watching us this week. We'll see you on Sunday. All the best to all the mums. In my world, it's Jude and Sian, and we love you more than ever before. Ta-da.